This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Bekritzis. In today's episode, we got three very seasoned entrepreneurs together to talk about customer acquisition, hiring, and taking companies to exit. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures. It's always great to hear experts in the field share reflections and insights. It's also great to sit down with old friends, and it's the best when your old friends are the experts. In this episode, Chuck Templeton sits down with Chris Gladwin, founder of CleverSafe, which was acquired by IBM in 2015, and Mike Evans, the founder of a little company called Grubhub, which IPO'd in 2014. This conversation was truly a treat. Not only are Chris, Mike, and Chuck all very accomplished entrepreneurs, but they have been close personally and professionally for many years. In addition to being leaders in the Chicago startup scene, Chuck was an advisor and mentor at CleverSafe and the founding chairman of Grubhub. Chuck, Chris, and Mike discuss the differences in customer acquisition for small business and enterprise customers, the push and pull of the scaling experience, what we can learn from Ernest Shackleton's hiring process, why entrepreneurship is like endurance sports, and the utter pain and joy of operating in unknown territory. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I did.
I'm really lucky to be able to have two of the people that I've known sort of the longest in the entrepreneurial world, Chris Gladwin and Mike Evans, here with me. I think it'll be a fun discussion today because I want to talk a little bit about how these two really dug in and built their businesses, from idea to exit. And I think there's a theme here where Chris's business started with some of the largest companies in the world as your target, and Mike, obviously, some of the smallest companies in the world with your target of restaurants. And so just to get started, I'd like you each to just quickly introduce yourselves if you had a minute. Chris.
Sure. I'm Chris Gladwin. And in terms of my entrepreneurial background, I've started four big venture-backed, large-scale companies. First one was called Cruise Technologies, and we made wireless thin clients back in the 90s. And then I started a company called Music Now that digital music services in the U.S. prior to the iTunes era. And then started a company called CleverSafe that made storage for hyperscale, extremely large data storage systems. And now I've started and running a company called Ocean, which makes software for the largest data analyzing systems in the world.
Awesome. Mike?
Yeah, my name is Mike Evans. I started a company called Grubhub, grew that from my apartment through the IPO, and then I took off, rode my bike across the United States. And then a couple of years after that, started another company called Fixer, which is a handy person membership service with a W-2 employee workforce. Both those are venture-backed. Both are direct-to-consumer businesses. Very different paths that they've charted, different circumstances they existed in, and still working hard on the Fixer business. Haven't been to Grubhub for a little while now.
Thank you for that. So, Chris, let's talk about CleverSafe. So what problem were you solving with CleverSafe?
So the company I started before, Music Now, built a system to store all digital music. And back then that was really big. It was, the size of this studio and then some, full of like racks of servers and tens of millions of dollars. And my experience with that and our experience with that as a company was it was terrible. The system would fail fairly regularly. And the solution from the vendors was, well, if one's not reliable, then buy three. Which I understand how that's good for them, but for us, that's just like 3 times the money, 3 times the cost, and it still would fail. So we then sold Music Now to Circuit City, and then I left. And so you kind of go through this period, and I'm sure Mike has a similar process where you start like exploring ideas. I mean, you've gone through that too, Chuck, where you explore ideas like, what am I going to do for a business? And I just knew that the state of the art of large scale storage was terrible because I had just experienced it. I lived the customer experience and I knew it was terrible. I had seen the best offers that vendors had. And so I knew that there was a market opportunity. And then at the same time, I had done some work over the years in wireless, and I knew technically how wireless kind of worked on the inside. And when I looked at the technology for storage on the inside, I'm like, this is primitive. This is like the technology of wireless of the 70s was what, storage was doing at that time in the 90s. And I thought, wow, this could be so much better. And there's a need for it. Living the experience of a problem, I knew anybody else who had the same kind of requirements would have that same problem.
And who were some of those potential customers that you saw and were thinking about?
When you start thinking about like large scale demand for information technology, you can model, like in the case of storage, you can say, well, where are the bits coming from? Like what are people storing? And then how do they kind of break down? So I remember making a model of how many hard drives are being manufactured in the world and how big are they on average. So then you could see, well, this is how much capacity is going into the market. And then, I think I assumed it was like, 70% full. Like that's how much storage there is. And then I started to break it down of like, all right, well then what is that? Is it spreadsheets? Is it pictures? What is it? And, you quickly come to realize is that this is being driven by photographs. That was the big change. Because prior to that, like most storage would be a document, like a Word document or maybe some kind of database with accounting information or something like that. And those are interesting, but those are tens of kilobytes, and then here comes pictures where they're like megabytes, millions of bytes, not tens of thousands of bytes. And so the size of these things were so much bigger. And then you started to see this phenomenon where in order to make a spreadsheet, you got to type, for a long time. In order to make a picture, you have to press a button. And you just start running the numbers like, well, how many times do I think people are going to take a picture? And, on and on. And it's like, whoa, this is going to dominate. And that turned out to be true. Like for that kind of 10-year period, storage was dominated by pictures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as the iPhone and other types of devices launched that now had this easy capability that had never been in anyone else's hands before, right?
We could feel it, and it was wonderful. So once we started getting all the photo sharing companies and the photo storage companies as customers, like we would get orders when they would need more storage. And we could feel it when Apple would introduce a new phone because all of a sudden the pictures got bigger and all of a sudden the orders got bigger. Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. So, Mike, what was your spark? What sparked you?
So I wanted a pizza.
Pizza.
It was a lot less sophisticated than what Chris just said, which isn't to say that we didn't bring sophistication to the business later on. But, that I've joked with people that like I was literally in a startup class 2 weeks ago at MIT. And they're like, well, how do you come up with ideas? And I joked with them. I said, just, the 7 deadly sins, like sloth, gluttony, greed. Just pick 2 and there's a business. And so we had sloth and gluttony. And so that was, and I say that jokingly, but actually it is a joke because when we were trying to acquire customers for Grubhub, we weren't just targeting people who were lazy. Like that's a very simplistic version of the experience. We were looking for people who were looking for variety and looking for quality. And, a lot of people have said, I don't understand what's so hard about picking up a phone. And yet 100 million people understand what's so hard about picking up a phone, the inaccuracy, the difficulty, getting put on hold, all of that. And so our experience was different. Well, Chris had a pain point, which was he had to build a storage system from scratch at a time well before AWS or any of these other systems existed. And I was trying to, at first, just discover who delivered to me and then eventually place online orders and then eventually place mobile orders. And then eventually the business evolved into being able to get delivery from every restaurant, not just the restaurants that had delivery. It started with the personal pain point, though, like it's hard to get a pizza. And so that was where the customer evolution sort of came from. And what was interesting is, Chris has to go, enterprise sale, he can talk about more than I do, but he has to go talk to somebody, a 3-letter government agency for 4 years before they buy his stuff, or 18 months for like a really fast-moving startup. For me, it was like I needed to get 1,000 people to sign up today and tomorrow and every day until 1,000 is not enough and I need 10,000. And so for me, it was about volume. And it really all became about like, how do you get your idea out there without the exorbitant costs of online advertising at the time they weren't as exorbitant as they are now. And it really comes down to how do you have a product that consumers really want and they want it so bad that they tell their friends about it. And if you don't have that advantage, you have to pay for those customers to show up, and you can't. If you're paying for all of your customers to show up and you're not relying on your product, then all of your profits just go to Google. Like you can't survive anymore on just paying for customers.
Yeah. I always thought early in the days for you, it was really interesting that early on, people would actually put their home address in your home screen when they were sort of going for the discover who delivers to them, right? Because back then it was really about privacy and not wanting to give anyone information. And you had a site where the first thing you asked for was someone's address, right? I mean, that's how you figured out who delivered to who. So
yeah. And there were days and days and whole projects around this idea of how much information do you ask for from a consumer before you provide value. And so a big part of it was by the time when they land on the site, they need to see something valuable. And so if they search for Edgewater delivery, they need to land on a page that has 10 restaurants. You can see their menus before they've typed anything in, because most people were coming to us through search engine optimization. They weren't necessarily coming right to the homepage. And so even you want to ask for very little before you start providing value.
Yeah. So I quote both of you for different reasons often, just because I think you're both such great entrepreneurs. One of the things, Mike, you talk about is just start, do something, take the first step. So what is that? I mean, aren't entrepreneurs supposed to know all the answers when they go into these startups?
No, I have this pet peeve when people talk about, well, I did this market research and I asked people if they would buy this. And I asked 100 people and 99 have said yes. You could be selling anything, and if you ask 100 people if they might buy it, they will all say yes. It is a very different answer when you have the thing and you're like, buy my thing, and what percentage of them actually buy it. Market research is completely useless from a consumer perspective, from the standpoint of consumers don't know if they're going to buy it. They only know at the moment they actually do the purchase. And so much is reliant on not just the product, but how it's presented, the legitimacy of the brand, the ease of use of the product and the transaction page. All these different things come into play to get to a yes from a transaction that you don't have to do with like market research. And the only way to get there is to literally just get your product out there and let people start buying it and then make it better. I mean, we're in year 6 of Fixer, and I feel like we're about halfway towards figuring out what it really takes to get people to buy a home maintenance plan where somebody shows up every month. And part of that's just because you learn as you go. You can't possibly guess the answers of what customers are going to like. You have to actually have customers that tell you what they like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a whiteboard's good for about 30 minutes, and then you got to get out and do something, right? And maybe 30 minutes is 29 minutes too long for you. But I do feel like that is a area where you just got to go and start.
The whiteboard can be real helpful if it's like 30 minutes the end of a 7-hour day, as opposed to 30 minutes before the 7-hour day, like reflecting on what you learned and how consumers behaved and how the product worked and how it didn't. That's super helpful. That's super valuable. That's part of the learning platform. But you are not your own customer. You have to actually talk to customers. And so this part of this Just Start mentality is like throw it on the wall and see what sticks. Because if you invent the perfect business in your head, you've accomplished exactly nothing.
Yeah. When I run, oftentimes I will have a great business when I start, and then by like 20 minutes in, that business is done, and then I'm on to another one. And so I go through like 3 businesses by the end of a run, and I still don't have a good business to think about starting.
And that's like you've done 100 miles because you run really fast.
That's funny. Okay, so Chris, one of my other favorite expressions, which I also think is important for an entrepreneur, and I give you credit for this. I'm not totally sure that this is you. I think it is, but in order to be in business, you have to be in business, right?
Yeah, that's me.
And I know that you have, barely made payroll on a number of occasions, and had to raise money from lots of different types of investors. Walk through, what do you mean by in order to be in business, you have to be in business?
Yeah, I mean, you often get asked when you do what we do, like, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give to another entrepreneur? And my answer always is that the number one reason businesses fail is they just don't last long enough. They're usually right about what they're building and its value. If you go back and look at all the really dumb ideas, supposedly from the dot-com crash, like people buying pet food and having it delivered to their house was the poster child of a stupid idea. Well, a lot of people actually have pet food delivered to their house.
I love that
sock puppet. But we're always wrong about how long it takes, including like those of us that are doing it again for yet another time. And so most of the time that you're failing is because you're on the right track. maybe you're course correcting, but that is the right track. The right track is course correcting. But that path is going to take you more time than you expected, and you're going to run out of money and then watch someone else do that. So that's what I mean by, in order to be in business, you got to be in business. If you're going to be in the business of learning what you're doing, selling it, succeeding, growing, you have to actually be in business long enough to do that.
There's just so much wisdom, I think, in both those characteristics. And Mike, I've always wondered what's happened to that puppet, to see whether like it's on someone's, trophy case somewhere or something, or maybe there's multiple of them. Who knows?
I have a Cosmo.com messenger bag in my basement that I ride my bike with still.
That's
because
awesome.
We were the third successor to the Cosmo.com concept. And there's still businesses that show up
Didn't they spend like $800 million in 9 months
some
or something
insane
like that?
amount of money. Yeah.
We had guys, so part of our team would be we were on the 45th floor of like the Empire State Building. And at night, the elevators would close down. And so you'd have to use the stairs, and they would they would go to Cosmo and get like a pint of Ben & Jerry's and have it delivered to the 45th floor or something.
Up the stairs? No.
These delivery people would get up there and they'd be so mad anyway. So it's funny because our teams used to, when they would install at restaurants, they would come back from the restaurant at 2 a.m. or whatever. But anyway, customers. Let's talk customers. How do you, when you're starting a company, Chris, and let's start with you because some really big customers. How do you win those customers? What do you need to do as an entrepreneur to win some of these big customers?
Well, the kind of business that I have found myself in my career is really enterprise sales. And it's just all about relationships and people. And so you have to develop these trusted relationships with buyers, customers for these large enterprises who are always too busy and they got a million people trying to sell them stuff. So for them to tell you what they need is a big investment of their time, which they never have enough of. And so you've got to go out and you've got to be credible. You've got to be an expert. You've got to not waste their time. You've got to show that you're going to be able to follow through on what you say and build this relationship where you can get them to basically write your business plan for you. Yeah. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And so they were willing to do customer discovery with you. So really sharing what their problems were, where the opportunities might be, maybe even what they're willing to pay to solve some of these problems and stuff like that.
They'll tell you their budget. They'll tell you what it's costing them today. They'll tell you, where would you need to be? It's a very typical question would be what number do I need to hit cost-wise for you to want to buy this, for you to buy this? And they'll tell you. The other thing that's really important is you have to look at the motivations of the buyer. So the buyer that put CleverSafe on the map was Shutterfly. That was really the first customer that really got us going in scale. That was a good example where they had a business that was selling unlimited photo storage, and occasionally you buy a mug or a photo book. That business was not making any sense at the cost of storage that they had. You just flat out would lose money. The more you grow, the more you lose. That's not a good business. And so they knew this is the number I need to get per reliable petabyte, my storage too. They knew the number, and they would tell us the number, and they had hired a whole management team with that number, and they're all bonused on that number. When you're an innovative technology company, when that's your setup, the people who are making the buying decision literally will get a bonus if you deliver for them. And in particular, the particular guy, his bonus was he gets the car of his choice up to some ridiculous number, like $200,000, $300,000, if he hits this number. For real. And that guy would walk on glass in bare feet. He'd be calling us at Saturday at 2 a.m, where's that, thing I need? Because he wants that car. And we got him the car.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Mike, what was the motivations for your customers? Why did they do it?
I'm listening to you and it's like you're speaking Greek. It's so divorced from my experience of customer acquisition. It's funny. We built businesses that ended up being worth a similar amount over a similar time frame, and we just had such a different approach on the customer side. There were certain things that we actually did very similarly, but for a consumer business where you're trying to build a brand, to the point where we ended up with Super Bowl ads. So it's about as far away from enterprise sales as you could go. And so for consumer experience, it's all about, is the product that you're shipping 10 times better than the alternative? 7 times better is not good enough. It has to be so much better than the alternative, that people adopt it aggressively. And the discovery was not there. So finding all the restaurants that delivered me, that was great. Like Google hadn't figured that out yet. We were the search engine for restaurants, sort of before. It's a good thing that we didn't rely on that, because we would have gotten crushed by Google when they finally got around to it. But that was like 3 times better than the Yellow Pages. It wasn't 10 times better. And even the combination of discovery and ordering, fulfillment and ordering, like the actual delivery food, that was like 7 times better. But the 10 times better, the killer app, was when you were more likely to have a high quality experience using the Grubhub app than you were calling the restaurant directly. And it's a little bit of a weird thing, because if you call a restaurant directly, you're going to have the same experience as if you use the Grubhub app. But if you use the Grubhub app, you're going to get filtered towards the restaurants that give you a better experience. And so we were constantly pushing consumers, our diners, towards the restaurants that didn't mess up the orders, that didn't have issues, that like did really good. And so the combination of search and ordering and fulfillment, that whole stack, which took some time to build, it took 5 or 6 years to build, was so much better that our adoption rates were through the roof. And then in addition to that, we got a little lucky. That all hit right as iPhone 1 App Store opened. And so we were the first, we weren't the first delivery app on the App Store, but we were the first one with more than 100 restaurants, and we had 15,000. And the funny thing is, I'm still learning about this, right? I left the company almost 10 years ago at this point, and I'm still learning things about how that experience went in retrospect, and how important that we were 10 times better than the widely accepted incumbent ordering process, looking at Yellow Pages, calling by phone.
Well, your whole objective was to raise all boats and make delivery better, more.
That was our mission
dependable.
statement, was make delivery better. So that was, we were trying to build a great product. The result of that was not just that people who are ordering once a month for delivery now place that delivery order with us. They moved to us, and they went from once a month to twice a week. And so we increased the size of the industry at the same time that we were capturing market share. That's why it went from in my apartment to 12 years later, a multiple billion-dollar IPO, is because we increased the size of an industry while capturing it, which is, I couldn't tell you how to do that again. It was like we bottled lightning a little bit, and I'm trying it again with Fixer, but it's been harder this time. Of course, we have a service where we go in people's homes, and we had a pandemic, which didn't help.
People don't like you coming in their homes.
Yeah, I mean, we lost, in March of 2020, we lost 85% of our revenue. And so we had to rebuild that, and that was really challenging. But it is really like starting to hit on all cylinders now.
It is said that at the early stages of a company, you are investing in talent more than anything else. Hiring the right people is absolutely critical, and as founders, Chris and Mike had to make sure they were surrounded by people who had the skills and the attitude to build a company from scratch.
This might be a more similar question for the two of you, just talent. Like, how did you, Chris, you got to sell a dream that's something, 2, 3, 4 years out before you're starting to see some revenue. And there's, tens of millions of lines of code you need to write, or something ridiculous. How do you hire and maintain and retain talent and, helping share that vision for them? How do you find those people?
Well, it's important to match the talent with what the opportunity is. And so I originally would interview every potential employee. And, one of the things I'd make sure to communicate is this is what it's like. You've got a large amount of newness to create as a part of a team, which is just simply difficult to do. It also means that you can't just phone it in. You actually have to be figuring things out. They have to be working, because it gets exposed if not, and if you're into that, if you're like the type of person that wants that kind of challenge, that can deliver on that wants to put that extra effort in to make it, it's wonderful, because it's like you're scratching this itch you have inside to be able to express yourself like that. If you're a person that just doesn't want that, it's like, why are you asking me to work so hard? It's just, I'm not enjoying it. You're not going to like it. So I want to make sure people understand that right up front. And then when it locks in, you've got the right kind of talent. This is the kind of opportunity they really want to have in their life. People really thrive.
Yeah. A lot of times people join startups because they think there's career advancement as the company grows. They can grow in responsibility and stuff like that. But in that environment, yes, you probably were growing your footprint of people, but was there a group of people who just wanted to be individual contributors and they just wanted to code because that's what they loved and that's what they did, or architect or whatever?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges you go through, and I'm sure Mike can speak to this and you can speak to this too, is in the early stage of a business, when you have, let's say, 10 people, everyone on average is doing 10% of all the work. And there's not a lot of management because every person knows what everyone else is doing. There's no, I've got to communicate and package information. Like everyone just sees it and knows it. And that's an environment where that style of individual contributor can really thrive. When you get to the growth phase, let's say it's 100 people now, there's no way everyone knows what everyone else is doing. It's just not possible. And what you're also trying to do at that phase is make it so that not just one person can do each of the tasks because that's too risky and it becomes a bottleneck. And for each of those individual contributors from the first phase, it's actually hard for them typically because emotionally they now have to trust that other people are doing what they used to do at least as good as they did it. They're not going to do it the same way that, that person would have done it. So now they have to accept that, well, like that way is good too.
Yeah.
Even though that doesn't feel like what I would have done.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a tough transition.
Yeah. I think that's true.
Some people make it, some people don't.
Yeah, and I think it's true with leaders too, right? When leaders used to be the very hands-on, doing a lot of the stuff, and then they've got to step back a little bit and let their people do things that may do it different than they used to or want to or like or whatever. So that's interesting.
I disagree.
Oh, all right.
I'm going to come in.
Like
I'm going to come in swinging.
There you go.
I think that there's a narrative around this idea that early people aren't always the best people later. And I think that I'm not going to say that's true or not true. I'm going to say that the two things are completely unrelated, that they're not correlated, that some people do great early, some people do great late, some people do poor in both those situations. And there's this assumption sometimes, especially for the founders and early executives of the company, that they're not going to be able to sort of like make the transition. And I think it prejudges that people are going to do poorly. And I think that a lot of startup founders and entrepreneurs and executives who could really thrive get ousted early because of the fear of it. And it's hard to replace that passion with like a professional CEO or professional executive. Sometimes you lose the fire in the belly. I've seen that happen as well. And maybe I'm not actually disagreeing with you, either of you. It is a tough transition to go from building to scaling. And it is a tough transition to go from coding to managing coders or doing marketing to managing marketers. But I think one of the things we found at Grubhub that was a real success was we didn't know that was hard. And we put people in these situations where I think about Jack, who started out doing a little bit of graphic design and also cropping the images of the menus that we put online. And he ended up creating a brand that got used in a Super Bowl. Like, no 22-year-olds don't get that opportunity, right? And so by giving people the opportunity to thrive, some of them failed disastrously, like crash and burn. But some of them surprised us beyond our wildest expectations. And it should be hard to let somebody pass over them for promotion or let somebody go because they didn't make the transition.
Yeah. How did you motivate people to join you early on in the company? I mean, you were your first programmer in the organization. You sort of wrote the initial app from getting it up and off the ground. What was the motivation? What was the thing you used to help get people excited about being there? And because you built a pretty stellar team coming out of the gate. It's a lot of solid people there.
I probably hired 4,500 people, and I don't think I ever experienced the problem of how do you motivate people to apply, to want to be engaged. And I think that was, literally we'd post ads on Craigslist, we'd post ads on Indeed, or typically we wouldn't pay for those, but sometimes we would. And we would get anywhere from 200 to 1,000 applicants for almost every position that we posted. Now, how many real applicants were there? Out of 1,000, if you just send an email back that says, hey, why are you interested in this job? 950 won't respond. So we probably really only had 50 applicants, right?
Yeah.
But, starting with like understanding what your mission is and making sure that you have values, making sure that they're real, making sure you hire on them and you retain with them and that you bonus based on them and you do discipline based on them. And if it's a growth place, that's also helped. At Grubhub, we grew really fast and people want to be a part of that. And then at Grubhub, we had a specific thing that was cheating, which is we were a consumer business. So we would email our job postings to our consumers. And so like if you have 1 million consumers, you just email, you're going to get foodies. And the foodies are interested in working at a food startup, right? It's about being authentic and transparent and vocal about who you are as a company and not lying about it. And then you attract like-minded people.
Yeah. I think, the best way to meet people's expectations is set their expectations, right? And so it's like Shackleton was a big, follower of that, of really being as blunt and sort of outgoing and honest as you can be. And the people who join
The Antarctic explorer Shackleton?
Yes.
That was
Shackleton.
a callback to another century.
Yes. His job reference, which they don't actually know if it was his, but is a really interesting.
Isn't it like low pay, high chance of death?
High chance of death.
Guarantee of adventure or something.
Safe return, doubtful, something like that. But in return for, if you return, you get like high praise or something like that. It was, and no one died, right? So
I'm a big believer, and this is true in hiring, but in relationships in general, of when people tell you who they are, believe them. When somebody says like, I don't want to work late nights, believe them.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways. The company has to be honest about who it is, who they are in the hiring and recruiting process.
Yeah. Chris, for you, have you seen a change from building Ocient now to when you were building Clever Safe, and how do you lead people and motivate people?
Well, the big change is the change in the work location. I had spent my career learning how to build information technology development companies with teams that were primarily located in a single place, and we'd all go to an office and watch each other type all day and have some meetings in the same room and then go back home. And then we had 40 people doing that when COVID hit. And now we have 150-something people, and we're in 7 time zones. And the majority of the people are now no longer in Chicago, which is where we were. We're all over the place. And we're remote first, and we get together as a company once a year in person. And I had to learn how to be successful in this new world, because it is profoundly different.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe, and we've measured this to the degree we can, but we're actually slightly more productive as a result. There's that commute time that goes away that's generally consumed with work. We're able to hire better people. Yeah, there's 10 million super well-educated people in Chicago, but there's only 10 million, and once you go global, there's never been another data warehouse software company in Chicago of any substance. So once we go to the world, we can go to all the places where those people have experience. We've had to change a lot. So one of the big changes is company culture. When everyone kind of gets together and goes to lunch all the time, like it just kind of happens. And so we've had to be, now that we're remote first, so much more intentional about it, like write it down. Like I've spent all this time like writing a company culture presentation and defining what communication means. And you never had to do that before. I think it ends up being more effective, but you have to just be much more intentional about it. So that's been my experience. But it's the biggest change in kind of the white collar work world maybe ever.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. The companies who have figured out how to lean into it can pull a lot of value out of it, but you do have to be very deliberate and intentional about it.
It just so happens that Mike, Chris, and Chuck all dabble in extreme sports. Chuck and Chris are both ultra runners, and after Mike left Grubhub, he set off on a solo bike trip across the United States, an experience which he recounts in his book, Hangry, A Startup Journey. It's not hard to draw out a connection between entrepreneurs and extreme athletes. Both entail hard work, risk-taking, perseverance, some pain, and high adrenaline experiences. Chris and Mike spoke about what they apply from adventure sports to their work.
You both are sort of extreme athletes in different ways and whatnot. Chris, you've done 50-mile runs and multi-day adventure races. And Mike, you've ridden your bike across this little thing called the United States and sailed a boat across this little thing called the Atlantic and whatnot. And so has that been a part of being an entrepreneur for you? Has it helped you? Do you think about things in a different way or given you more calmness under pressure? Has that been involved?
It's taken a few years of therapy to figure out an answer to this question. So I'll try and share with you what I figured out. When you asked Chris a question earlier, which was like, what was the one thing you figured out? And I'm like, oh man, I don't even know if I figured anything out yet. Like if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd have had the top 5 things I know about how to be a good entrepreneur. Now at 20 years, I'm like, none of that was right. It's like I'm still figuring it out. And that is the thing. It's learning. It's being brutally honest with myself about the things that we know about the business, but I know about human interactions, and looking at the data and seeing if I'm right and confirming the things that are right and turning the things on its head that were wrong. And I feel like there's an element of, if you're not learning about what this means, not even in this new business, but in this new year, in this old business, you just get left behind. There's this element of like self-learning that has to be, it requires discipline. It requires really just being honest with yourself, brutally honest with yourself about your faults and about how you can grow. And so I think the adventure sports is about that's about learning. Like, how do I get 6 people across an ocean on a sailboat safely? It's a life and death sort of scenario.
Yeah, and it's not like you had been on another sailboat to do it a first time. This is
you have to do it. Well, I mean, I had sailed as crew, but I'd never been a captain. I had done a couple of ocean trips, but you have to learn, and that was life and death, and so it was a learning experience. And the aspect of adventure that I thrive on is the learning aspect, not the adrenaline aspect.
Yeah.
And so that's what took me 3 years to figure out. Why do I have to keep doing all this stuff? And it turns out if you're not, the opposite of boredom is learning. Yeah. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Chris.
Well, the reason that it's called work is because it's work. And a lot of people that get confused, especially early in their career, that a good job or fulfillment comes from something that's just fun. And I hear this, I can't wait to get up in the morning and go to work every day is that's your goal. Well, a lot of work isn't like that. And it doesn't mean it's not successful. It doesn't mean you're not doing stuff, but most work isn't super fun. Like sales, when you're selling to enterprise buyers, you're going to get rejected most of the time. When you're raising money from sophisticated investors, you're going to get rejected most of the time. A lot of your life is going to be no. And no is not fun. And the thing is, to be successful, you have to put a ton into it. You have to spend countless hours tweaking exactly what you're going to say and how you say it. And you're going to go do all this research on how does every other company account for ARR or do their gross margin calculation, because you've got to get that just right. And then you've got to really understand why would this person invest or why would this person buy? And so you've got to go make those things that make them want to do it. And that's a lot of work. And so you put all this into it and then you get a no. And it hurts. And it can't not hurt if you're really trying. And so I don't know which one's the correlation. I don't know which one's the chicken or the egg, but that's a lot of what, adventure sports, endurance sports are like. And sports in general is, what do you think it feels like to be extraordinarily good at soccer or football? Most of what it feels like is pain.
Yeah.
And it hurts. Yes. People are hitting you. Yes. And the other thing is, the more innovative stuff you're doing, the more you're pushing the envelope, the more it hurts, because you by definition go into territory that you don't understand.
That no one understands, right?
Yeah, and so you're in this territory of
best case scenario, no one understands it, and somebody else hasn't beaten you to it.
Right.
That's the best case scenario. Is you're painting on a blank canvas.
Exactly.
You're not painting over an already existing Mona Lisa.
Well said. Well said. Yeah.
People like us like to feel like we know what we're doing. But that means you're doing something that's not innovative. You're not pushing the envelope. It's much more fun to be in the room I got all the answers. I know I'm right. I can prove it to you. But that means you're not doing something innovative.
The alternative case is horrible. And because that's what happens. Grubhub had almost the entire market, and then Uber Eats and DoorDash showed up. And it wasn't as unknown anymore. And so the advantage went away. You want to be in the unknown territory. But it sure does feel pretty shaky when you're there.
Yeah.
But it's worse after you're not there, after everybody catches up. That's way worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think about it as being comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We had a conversation at Fixer. This was a month ago. And one of the Fixers I feel it's a lot of change. You just changed everything. We're not profitable yet.
Yeah.
And it's going to keep changing until we get it right.
Yeah.
We're trying to do something different.
Yeah.
It's going to keep changing.
And it's hard. Yeah. And it's hard. And you're swinging in the dark sometimes, and you're making efforts. And it seems like it, there are times where it's always going against you for sure. So.
Yeah, that was especially true it actually was all going against us during the pandemic for a little while there. It wasn't just an appearance. It was okay, this actually stinks.
That's funny. Okay, so last question here. So exits. I mean, I'm guessing neither of you necessarily started your company just to sell it, right? Or just to take it public, whatever. How do you think about exits? Do you prepare for them early on? Are you just trying to build the best? A lot of people just say, I'm just going to build the best company there is, and then someone will come along and buy it, or I'll go public or whatever. Chris, how did you think about with Clever Safe in particular?
Well,
and with what you're doing at Ocean. Sorry,
yeah, I mean, but we're using the same template, new and improved for Ocean, always learning. So in order to change the world, you have to do what you're doing. And you have to be a good investment. And so you have to build something that is a good investment. To do that, you have to understand in advance, what does that mean? So the way we did that at CleverSafe is we studied every company in the enterprise data storage industry, which was our industry, every company in the prior 20 years that had an exit of at least $1 billion through a public market. And what was good then was when they would go public, you would get all of their financials. And you could then look and see what they did and how they did it. And so we took all their financials and we time normalized them so they all had the same IPO year. And then we would superimpose our planned IPO year on that. And we could go back into, let's say we're an IPO year -5. And we could look at like everybody else, like, well, at this point in time, how much were they spending on R&D? How much they were spending on R&D as a percent of total spend? What were their margins? Like you could just get all the data and see. And so that really informed us on like, well, there's a template here. So then we knew in advance, like, this is what we have to do. And now we can raise money so we can do all the things we need to do to make the world better with storage and and deliver value to our investors and give our employees, all the tools they need and the people they need and the upside they really deserve. But it had to get linked to that future outcome. And then we also got to know who are the investment bankers that underwrote those companies' IPO. It's on the cover of the S1. You just call them. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I plan to tell you in several years when we go public. And they'll tell you the answer on the test in the future. They'll say, well, actually, your margins are a little light. You need to, and they'll give you that guidance. Now, in the case of CleverSafe, we didn't get to a public market, but the fact that we prepared for one was exactly the things we needed to do so that when we had a buyer, in that case IBM, show up, they valued us in those same ways.
Yeah, and Mike, you got to go public, and there were large slices of pizza dancing around
on the New York Stock Exchange.
On the New York
floor.
Stock Exchange.
And a big sushi.
And a big sushi. Was there a bagel too or something?
Yeah, there was a third piece of food. I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, we took a different approach. There's a lot to unpack here, but I want to talk about, there's a thing that happens as a business starts to get successful. And you're acquiring customers at one rate, so call it $20, and you're making $70 on them over the course of the first year. That sounds like a pretty good business, right? And so an investor will say, okay, well, why don't we spend $1 billion on acquiring customers then? And there's this relationship between growth and the amount of capital that you can spend, which really comes down to dilution in your company. And you're sort of trading off dilution and growth and figuring out how fast you grow. And then there's traps. Like there's this fallacy that if you spend $1 million on X customers and you can spend $1 billion on 1,000 X customers, it's false.
Right, because it's not linear. It's not linear. Less efficient as you go.
Yeah, customers get more expensive as you go.
Yep.
And so thinking about all these things, and so that you have to be able to say no to the investors. And there's an underlying principle behind that I believed, that my business partner Matt also believed, which was really important, which was, we said this explicitly to each other. We care more about the existence of an exit than the size of the exit. Mm-hmm. So if we could get $1 million at a 90% probability or $1 billion at an 80% probability, take the 90%, take the smaller return, because that return is going to pay off my student loans and I'm going to be able to buy a house and I'm going to be able to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Whereas $1 billion, like, what are you going to buy a basketball team? Like, what are you going to do with it? There's a marginal utility on everything after a certain amount of an exit. And I didn't know this at the time, but we had a mentality about like, smaller piece of a bigger pie, bring as many people in as possible, share the ideas, like don't worry about the valuation, get the right investors, get the right advisors, surround ourselves with people giving us really good advice, even if that means we give up a piece of the pie. And arguably we did. Arguably we gave up too big of a percentage of the business relative to the dollars that we received. But at every point we were maximizing the probability that we would exit. Yeah. And then internally that was reflected in the fact that we were profitable. Like, we cared about expenses, we cared about margin, we cared about unit case. And so all of those things came together to build a company that just survived difficult times because we were profitable. We weren't dependent on investment dollars to continue to exist. And so it turns out that if you build a high growth, profitable business, exits take care of themselves. Like there's a strategic or a public sale or private equity. Someone will buy your company for a lot of money if you build a high growth, profitable business. And so in some ways, you don't have to worry about it in the way that people talk about you're supposed to during the business plan pitch. But it does require a strong philosophy, because at the end of the day, the investors who are trying to figure out how to make the most money in the shortest period of time, regardless of the value of the customers, are the ones you have to say no to, whether they're public investors or they're venture capitalists or they're private equity, whoever they are. If they're like, well, how do I make a buck quickly? You got to be able to shout them down in the boardroom for whatever crazy idea they come up with. Yeah. And instead say, no, we're gonna figure out the thing that creates value for customers 10 years from now. Thanks for your input.
Yeah. Okay, I know I said those last one. One more thing. Any advice for entrepreneurs?
Well, that's what I said, is that the advice is figure out how to last as long as possible, and really as long as needed, because it's going to take you 2-3 times longer than you think. And you need to be there when your success happens.
Yeah. In order to be in business, you have to be in business, right? So, Mike, any other?
Yeah. In addition to lasting, you have to start.
Yes.
So
I like it.
if you take the combination of those two pieces of advice, what we're really saying is maximize the amount of time you're actually selling things to real customers.
There you go.
Start as early as you can, and make actual money, and be careful with the expenses so that your burn rate's not high. And then you do all those things in combination, and you just exist for a longer time horizon,
which increases your chances of getting a hit. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, Chris, Mike, thank you. A lot of fun. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Chuck. That was awesome.
Yeah.
There are countless complicated aspects to entrepreneurship, but the fundamentals are straightforward. You have to start, and you have to last. For both Chris and Mike, the will to jump in, an unyielding perseverance, and a learning mindset were crucial to their success. I know I learned so much from this conversation about not only what it takes to start a company and take it to exit, but then to turn around and do it all over again. Thank you for tuning into the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.